This is part 2 of our Lego minifigure tutorial, and we should actually finish creating the geometry for the Lego minifigure in this tutorial. So you can see at this point we're missing the head, we're missing the arms on both sides, and we're also missing this little hip plate kind of thing here. We've got a little bit of refinement to do sort of everywhere, but those are the big chunks that we're missing. I'm currently in object mode, and I'm going to start on the arms by creating a cylinder. So you can see that's pretty much too large. I've got some parameters down here I can adjust. Where this is going to be a lot smaller, we probably don't need as much detail. I'm going to take the vertices down to 16 from 32. Let's get transparent there by hitting our Z key so we can get in wireframe view and kind of size this down. Obviously, since it's a cylinder, you've probably guessed I'm creating the hands first. I don't want a cap fill on this, so I'm changing it not to triangle fan, not to n-gon, but to nothing. Okay, let's come over here and size this a little bit better. Needs to be rotated, so R90 on the keyboard and then press enter. That's now rotated the right way. I'm just gonna eyeball this into position here. I've got these nice crosshairs that tell me where the center of that circular shape should be. So that works out pretty well. I can scale that down to be the right radius. Then in my right orthographic viewport, I can scale this. I'll move it back and forth first, and then scale in the y-axis, SY on the keyboard, to kind of get things the right size there. Okay. So from here, obviously we have this super thin shape that just approximates the outside edges of the hand. I've got all of the geometry selected, so I'm going to tap E to extrude. You can see I can take the shape in either direction. I'm going to hit escape so that I don't move it. Then I'm going to tap S on my keyboard to scale and start bringing that in. I'm going to hit Shift Y on my keyboard so that I don't scale that in the Y-axis. I want the inside to be the same length as the outside in the Y-axis. So that actually creates some geometry for me, and it's a complete closed loop. I don't need that, obviously. So I'm going to tap B on my keyboard to box select just these vertices. I'm selecting all the way through since I'm in wireframe mode. Then I'm going to delete those vertices. You can see that's a little bit closer to the claw shape. However, you can also see it's open on the ends. So if I select these 4 vertices and tap F on the keyboard, then I can close this shape off and create this kind of claw hand thing that the Lego minifigures have going. It's shaped a little bit incorrectly, but I can, again, with a box selection, tap B on your keyboard, I can select these vertices back here, and I can move those roughly into position. This is fairly rough geometry that we're creating here. So there's not much mathematical about it. We're just kind of eyeballing it into position. Okay, and that actually looks pretty good. That's a pretty decent approximation of the shape from the front there. These faces up here at the top, I can see that's where the arm starts coming out of the hand. But I don't have enough subdivisions in the claw hand to actually start extruding the arm out there. So I'm going to do a loop cut and slide, line it up basically with where the arm starts coming out of the hand. I'm going to give myself just a little more detail in the back here because I know off the top of my head that there actually is a little more hand geometry at the back of the hand if you look at an actual Lego minifigure. So in order to tell which vertices to select, I'm just going to select all of these along the top. You can see I don't need the ones in the front selected, so now I can tap C on my keyboard to get my circle selector, middle click to deselect those vertices that I do not need selected. And I now have something from which I can extrude the arm. So let's go back to our front view, tap 1 on the number pad, and tap E to extrude. And I need to flatten this out a little bit. So I'm going to scale, and whoops, that didn't work. So I hit escape. I'm going to try scaling along the axis of the normals here. Whoa, that didn't work either. So, okay, let's just scale in the z-axis by a factor of 0, and then we can rotate our top edge here. There we go. That's, again, this is all very approximate, but that's actually looks pretty close to what we need. So from here, I can start extruding out the rest of the geometry. Tap E and escape because I don't want to move things around, and then I'm just going to scale my new geometry out that I created when I tapped E. Then we tap E again to extrude up, tap E again to extrude up some more. Now, obviously the shoulder's tapering at the top. As I get to the top here, I can just, whoops, again, got to select in wireframe mode. I can scale that, but it starts scaling away from the wall of the body, which I don't really want. So if I click on one of these vertices and then click Shift S, I can put my cursor, my 3D cursor, onto the vertex I have selected. And then down here you can see I can actually change the pivot point for my transform operations. So scale, move, rotate, they'll pivot around something. Right now that's set to the median point, and I can set that to 3D cursor. So now if I select all these and tap S to scale, they will scale toward that pivot point, which is the 3D cursor. You don't necessarily want that behavior all of the time, but that can be handy sometimes. So from here, that's actually looking pretty good. And I've kept my alignment. I'm going to put my 3D cursor back down toward the bottom of, or back to the origin of my scene, just because that's where I usually expect it. Start rotating, and I can see, whoops, I left my pivot point on the 3D cursor, so that was rotating strangely. I'm going to click that and change it back to median point so it behaves the way I expect it to. Now if I start rotating, it rotates around the center of whatever I have selected. So rotate that, scale it out, just kind of get things shaped the right way here. And again, this is very approximate what we're doing. We're creating rough geometry here. Rotate and scale that out a little bit more. Now the shoulder's going to be a little bit tricky because it's actually a curved piece. And rotate that. And you know what, actually, I think I am going to leave that unrotated for a minute. And we'll come back to that, and you'll see why, or at least I'm anticipating that it might be easier if I handle things that way. So I'm going to come up here and start creating this shoulder. I can see it looks to me like from the front view my geometry is a little bit high. I'm going to drag that down, scale it out just a little bit. And then I think I can just extrude and rotate, then kind of scale down to sort of start creating approximately the shape of this shoulder. And that's what I'm doing here, is approximating. This is by no means a precision operation. So that looks okay from the front, but from the sides here you can see things start to get a little bit weird. And I think, again, I can just kind of start to approximate the curvature of the shoulder. Move these in just the y-axis. So G, Y. And I know G is not necessarily an intuitive key for move. I guess you might expect that to be M on the keyboard, but it's not. So I always think, in my head, I always think grab in Y, G, Y, grab in Y, grab in the y-axis. And it's pretty intuitive for me to think of it that way. But it can get a little confusing if I'm saying grab all the time. Anyway, let's work on the back of the shoulder here a little bit. Go from our right orthographic view. And just kind of line things up. And again, we're basically just eyeballing a shape here. For now, we're getting the rough geometry in place. Grabbing Y. I can see that that shoulder indent needs to go away. Switching between shaded and wireframe viewports can be one of your very, very best tools because they give you a different perspective on whatever you're looking at. That can be really, really important. That actually is starting to look okay. So we need to do the same thing up here. We need to get rid of this shoulder dent that I've accidentally created, basically. Just kind of pull that out. And that is a little bit closer shape. This looks pretty straight here, so let's move those, grab them in the y-axis. Just kind of curve things around a little bit. There. Okay, and I'm actually fairly happy with that as far as a rough approximation of the geometry that we need goes. So that looks pretty good. I think I'm going to leave that alone. Okay, so obviously the last problem we have with the arm is that there is no other arm. So let's go to our modifier stack. Click on our mirror modifier and you can see that it is in fact mirroring an X, but it's mirroring around that pivot point which is in the middle of the claw hand right now. So if we set that origin to the 3D cursor, which is back at the origin of our scene, then it mirrors properly and everything looks right. So that looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with the look of those arms. Okay, so moving on, we need to come down and basically make this hip piece down here that goes between the legs. You can see actually, let's deal with this first. The legs are actually missing a couple of little details that we need to include. There's a slope on the outside edge here, and then on the inside edge there's basically kind of a bevel that we haven't dealt with. So let's have a look at this. I think we can just rotate this. We select all these vertices on the outside and rotate it to where it looks like about the right angle. Grab those in the x-axis. And then this down here, this area down here needs to be flat. So we need to flatten that back out. Let's have a look at the 1.23446. That's the x coordinate of that particular vertex. You'll see why I'm looking at that in a second. So we scale these in x by 0, and that actually didn't look right to me. So I'm going to scale the next set up, and that looks right. But whoops, I actually need to check now. 1.2338 on the position of that vertex in x. So scale in x by 0 to flatten it out, and then change those back. All of these vertices in the x-axis need to be in the position that top one was at, so that there's no little sticky outy portion before that goes flat at the bottom there. Basically, it just needs to continue at the same angle that it did. So let's deal with this bevel in here now on the inside of the leg. I'm going to turn off our mirror modifier so that I can see inside there a little bit, and I'm going to go down and do face selection mode. Tap C on my keyboard to get my selection paintbrush here, and then just paint all these inside vertices. That's actually, as far as I understand, that's the shape of the bevel. Then just extrude that out and fill the space that needs to be filled by that bevel. Okay, that looks pretty good. So as far as our leg details go, that's probably about where we need to be. So it looks good, it's mirrored. I'm going to turn the mirror modifier back off because now it's time to deal with this plastic hip piece. I'm in object mode. I'm going to create a new cylinder. The reason I have to be in object mode is I don't want to be creating a cylinder that's part of another object. So I'm going to fill the end of this with a triangle fan, and I'm going to turn my detail back up, 32 vertices. And we can start to play with pieces here. I think this is going to be easiest to start with a cylinder. So that looks like about the right width to me. I've rotated it. And let's get her lined up here. So grab this in the Z-axis. Now, this is going to be a lot easier if I have some visual guides from the legs. So I'm going to come over to the object data for the leg, turn on wire, and draw all edges as far as its display goes. Now I can see exactly where the center of the radius of the round portion of the legs are, and I can grab this in the z-axis and kind of move it in there. And the hip portion, its circular part, is going to be centered really well. I'm going to scale this up. I'm going to tap Shift X so it doesn't become any thicker because I was already happy with the thickness. So basically I'm scaling in the Y and Z axes and not X, and that actually looks like it's going to fit really nicely. That's pretty much right where I want that to be. So this is a fairly complicated piece as far as its geometry goes, but it's pretty simple to make. Let's tab into edit mode. We're already in face select mode, and let's just select the faces that are going to create this rectangle up here. So hold down Shift and click on each face that you need, and then tap E to extrude. Bring them up and scale them in Z by a factor of 0 to flatten them out. Grab them in the Z-axis to kind of move them up a little bit, and we're on our way. Let's grab the front and back faces, extrude. We can move up and down but not out, so we escape and then scale in the Y-axis to move those out where they need to be. I can see they're not quite aligned, so I'm going to do that again, scale in Y and kind of get them lined up with that top torso piece. Okay, and that actually is looking pretty good. Now we need to do the same thing in the X-axis as we just did in Y with this rectangular piece. We'll just select the faces here that form the portions that need to be wider and tap E to extrude. Hit escape and then scale them in the X-axis to their approximate width that they need to be. So you can see this piece here is actually angled a little bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to select all of the vertices on one side, and I'm going to, we've got that curve on the bottom, and it's going to mess us up if we just try scaling things. So I'm going to rotate this by a factor of, say, -2, and that looks pretty good. So rotate -2. On the other side, we rotate +2. So R-2, R2, depending on which side you're on. And both of those look right, and they're mathematically identical. So now I can select both sides and scale in X. And I'm pretty happy with the way that looks. That looks right to me. So from here, we can select the leg. We no longer need all these draw all edges and the wireframes visible. We can turn our mirror modifier back on, and that's starting to look pretty legit as far as the geometry goes. Obviously, it's a headless Lego man still, so we need to fix that. So let's go make the head, and this is probably going to be the easiest piece. Again, I'm in object mode. I don't want to accidentally create the head as part of another object. I'm going to create a cylinder and cap it with a triangle fan. I can't see it there, so tap Z for a wireframe view. And then I'm just going to approximate the size and proper depth for the head. It doesn't really matter. I can always scale this later. Grab in the Z-axis and bring it up into position. I can see that it's maybe not quite the right size vertically. We'll scale that in Z. Just kind of get the flat parts here, and actually, you know, I think I'm going to change my mind on that. I'm going to scale this all the way up in the Z-axis for the full height of the mid portion of the head. Scale that down, and I'll show you why in a second. I'm just kind of trying to think ahead as to how I'm going to model this. So that seems pretty good. And in my tools menu, I can go to loop, cut, and slide. I have to tab into edit mode for this. And hit 2 on my keyboard to create 2 loop cuts. I'm going to opt out of positioning them and just scale them in the Z-axis so that they come to the point of curvature on the head, so that I can start maybe selecting the top and the bottom and scaling those in. Now I want to hit Shift Z when I'm scaling so that I don't scale up and down. just in X and Y. So that's actually a pretty decent approximation. We'll come back to that later. Let's box select the top and tap E to extrude. You can see I can move it, but I don't want to, so hit escape, then scale it down to be the width of that button top on the top of the head. Then tap E to extrude again, come to the point of curvature this time, tap E to extrude one more time, then scale this whole thing in to kind of approximate that bevel on the button top. That looks pretty good. Okay, now for the bottom. We need to create this neck, so let's box select the bottom vertices, and you can see I can move again, but I tapped E to extrude. I don't want to, so hit escape and scale things down. Then tap E to extrude again, and we extrude out from our new start point. So that looks pretty good. I don't have any frame of reference from the front view for the cavity that should be on the inside, but on the side I do. It shows me how big that is. So once again, tap E to extrude, scale it in so that it's the right width for that inside cavity, then tap E to extrude one more time and extrude inward. That looks pretty good for the inner cavity. Now I'm going to refine this edge bevel that we have just a little bit, because that's it doesn't look quite smooth enough to me. So I'm going to do a loop cut and slide here. Loop cut and slide here. Control R, of course, is the shortcut for that. Now I have that one selected. If I Option Shift click on this upper loop, then I can have both loops selected and I can start scaling them. If I hit Shift Z, then they don't scale up and down, but actually it looks to me that's a good width, but I think I do want them to scale up a little bit. So now I'm going to scale in just Z, so SZ on the keyboard. And I think that looks like a pretty good approximate shape. Okay, so this is looking pretty close to how we want it. We do have one interesting little problem on the arms here. You can see they're a different color than everything else. That's because the surface normals are a little mixed up as to which direction they're actually supposed to be showing. We talked a little bit about surface normals in class. These surface normals are incorrect. So I'm going to tab into edit mode and select all of the geometry here. So just tap A on the keyboard to select all. Then over in the shading / UVs portion of my tool palette, I have this recalculate normals button. If I click that, you can see that everything kind of figured out where it was supposed to be. That's kind of a magical little button there. Now, one more thing I'm going to do, I think I'm going to refine the shape of the torso just a little bit, because it has some curvature at the top that we haven't addressed. So let's tab into edit mode on that and then do a loop cut and slide, just to give ourselves a little more geometry to describe this curvature at the top. I'm going to scale the top edge in after we start our loop cut, and I can see that that needs to scale in Y even more than it does in X. So come to the side view and scale in Y, the right orthographic view. Maybe do one more loop cut and scale that in Y as well. Scale in X from this view, and that's probably a little better approximate shape. Let's maybe shrink that down just a little more. There we go, and I'm pretty happy with how that is looking. So one last thing, you'll notice that everything here looks really faceted. It doesn't look very smooth. You can actually change that over in the tools menu. You can set the shading from flat to smooth, and that will save you from having to create a lot of detail. You have to be in object mode for those buttons to show up this way. So let's just click on smooth while we have that head selected, and you can see that everything smooths out. Basically the computer is just, or Blender is just approximating the transition between faces instead of showing a hard transition. So you're not changing your geometry at all, you're just changing the way it's being displayed. So that looks pretty good for now. And you might remember this object that keeps floating into view here. This is the camera object. If I tap 0 on the numpad, I can actually look through that camera. While I have it selected, you see the orange border there, I can use my normal manipulators. Tap G to move that around and pick a different view. This is the view that we'll render from. So I can see I can't quite fit it in there. If I go to a top view and move that back a little, then go back to my camera view and hit the G key to move that around, I can actually come over here to my render menu and just click render. I can kind of see how things are coming along.